fondly referred to as the Mac, the Mackintosh building at the Glasgow School of Art is celebrating its centenary this year.
Even now, this building is ahead of its time. It's all about letting light in, and it's in one of, Europe's gloomiest cities. It's just so elegant and beautiful. I mean, if you designed it now, it would still win awards. It's brilliant.
This remarkable building sealed Charles Rennie Mackintosh's reputation as one of the most innovative and creative Scots of the 20th century, and established him as a pioneer of the modern movement. But there is more to the Mac than just form and function. This building has a life of its own and has had an overwhelming impact on the creative lives of those who have studied here.
And I remember when I got to the steps and just looked up, I knew that my life was just going to change forever. It was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me.
This building, the Mackintosh building at the Glasgow School of Art, makes you want to paint. The building, the studio is a design for painting. They're designed for making someone want to work on paintings and drawings.
Peter Hutchison is one of Scotland's best known and most successful artists. He studied painting in the Mackintosh building.
The studios are so beautiful. They've got such an atmosphere. It's almost as if Mackintosh actually magically put an atmosphere into it. I mean, through his imagination.
There's a utilitarian kind of workability about this building that when you're working in it and sort of just moving about in it, it just works. It's absolute epitome of what's brilliant about architecture, because you don't notice why it's working, really. It doesn't have huge processional spaces. It's not about it, it's about you. I suppose that's it.
People who are going through education are questioning and quite often vulnerable, because you don't know who you are until you come out the other end. And I think you're always looking for clues to reassure you as to how to behave, what to expect, how high to aspire. And I think that the architecture plays a vital role in moderating your behaviour and your ambitions.
The brilliant thing about this building, the absolutely fantastic thing about it, is that it's still a functioning art school. That shows you the genius of Mackintosh.
Founded in 1845, the Glasgow School of Art spent many years housed in different buildings around the city, none of them fit for purpose. So when the dynamic Francis Newbery became director of the school in 1885, he decided to launch a competition to design new premises.
We call it the Mackintosh building, but Mackintosh was, no question, he was the architectural genius that turned it into what it is. But it couldn't have happened without Newbery and the sheer dynamism that he brought to the project.
Newbery was a forward-thinking man. An accomplished painter himself, he wanted all his students to develop a hands-on approach to crafts and practical skills.
He will design best the proportion of what is lived in, who best realizes the form and proportion of him who inhabits.
Having appointed a building committee for his new art school, he knew exactly what he wanted. Just 5 pages long, the brief detailed everything, including the specification for north-facing windows. On the 13th of January, 1897, the winning design was revealed. It had been submitted by Honeyman and Keppie, a local firm of architects that employed the 28-year-old draftsman Charles Rennie Mackintosh.
Mackintosh is the person within Honeyman and Keppie who does the designing of the drawings which won the competition, and that's the kind of major creative part of it.
Mackintosh may have worked for Honeyman and Keppie by day, but by night he was himself a part-time student at the Glasgow School of Art. For 10 years he'd been studying under the watchful and encouraging eye of Francis Newbery, benefiting from the school's hands-on approach to craft skills. And just by being there, he knew how art students worked and what they really needed from a building.
Maybe there's a link between the creative output of this building and the building in itself, in that this building doesn't conform to a prescribed style, and the people who worked here don't do that either. Hello. Hiya. I'm doing a grand tour here. I'm talking about architecture for a change. I must know something about something. There's a wee greenhouse sticking out there. Cantilever there. A bizarre thing.
Adrian Wiśniewski has worked with an eclectic range of techniques over the last 20 years. He first studied architecture at the art school and then completed a degree in fine art. Together with Peter Hutchison, Stephen Campbell, Stephen Conroy and Ken Curry, he was one of the famed New Glasgow Boys, a group of Scottish figurative painters that rose to prominence in the 1980s.
Right, am I still talking here then? Yeah. OK. This is one of the studios which I came here. This was my postgraduate type studio. Well, Ken Curry was in this studio. He had this studio for himself, which is enormous. And my studio's through there, where there's about 30 people through there at the moment working on computers. But that was me and a chap called Chris Taylor. And we worked there, and we had a sofa, and tutors would knock the door, say, can we come in? Oh, that's... I mean, I love this kind of studio now. I mean, look at the size of the windows. The glazing here is phenomenal. So as you can see, north facing, great light coming in here. Because I studied architecture, I was aware of the quality of the space here. Very conscious that I was in a masterpiece. But it was the students who you learnt off, you know, and so you weren't in a dead building. You were in a living space.
It's almost like Mackintosh realised that people dwell in buildings for long periods of time, not just for one class or another class. They almost live in them.
Janice Kirkpatrick is the co-founder of Graven Images, an internationally successful interior design company, which she formed during her final year at the art school.
See, I love when you get things like this, so people are actually having a meeting and they've had to pull in an extra couple of chairs. It's terrific. He's provided such a wonderful array of spaces to allow people to be in it in lots of different ways without being over-prescriptive. It just invites you to hang out here rather than go out the front door and somewhere else.
These are quite high up, but they're quite good places to have a wee nap. You know, you can sit up there with your knees up and have a view out there and read a book and drop off. Lovely.
This sounds so cheesy, but I have been in the Glasgow School of Art for just 4 years, and I think this school is a one-off. This is Pete's studio. Pete is mental. He actually travelled across a country in a bike that makes sounds. I'll show you the bike now. Well, it's actually fallen apart, but if you look down, there's a little bit of the bike behind me there, but it makes loads of noises.
The Mackintosh building's quite nice, really, when you come down to it. It's a nice lump of rock in the middle of Glasgow.
Oh, here's my sink that I wash my brushes in every day. I could wash my hair in it. We've got a very busy man here behind me. La 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 la. Ooh, there's outside. I love outside.
I think this building is one of the sort of few spaces that sort of can somehow
I don't know, it physically embodies and encapsulates the sort of different aspects of those stages of self-discovery and learning, and in a space like this, which is so made for artists.
Ross Sinclair's photographs, sculptures and installations have been shown all over the world. Over the past decade, much of his work has explored the concept of real life, a phrase which he's had tattooed on his back.
The images are me and my eldest daughter, who was, she was about 5 years old then and just about to start school, which is kind of daunting for your own children, I think, particularly when I kind of found this space, this place that really worked for me and really enabled me to become who I am now. I suppose it's a sort of concern, will she be able to find the same thing?
At the turn of the last century, Glasgow was the second city of the British Empire. Rich with industrial money, it celebrated its wealth with grand public buildings.
What was happening in architecture at that time, at the end of the Victorian era, the beginning of the Edwardian era, was that buildings were very fruity. You know, they were baroque, they were exuberant. By contrast, Mackintosh was really quite restrained.
Because this is, in many ways, a modest building, until you understand how Glasgow works. It's a modest building. It's a part of the Glasgow grid. It's built of the same sandstone as the tenements were and so forth. So in many ways, it's kind of not invisible, but not easy to see. And you'll be walking outside the school at the front gate and somebody will come up to you and in some foreign accent or other, they'll say to you, "Excuse me, where is Art Nouveau building?" And you think, ah, right, you're standing right beside it. Now, once you know that's it, once you understand Glasgow, once you start to look at this building, you see how spectacular the building is. But at first glance, if you just arrived in Glasgow, you might not notice it.
The brief and budget for the new art school were meagre compared with other new builds at the time. In fact, the building committee specifically asked for a plain building, as they had to raise the money themselves. But whilst appearing to satisfy the request for a plain and cheap building, Mackintosh did not restrict himself creatively.
He's playing a lot of games with symmetry. So, like, I've looked at this for 6 months and I've only just realised there are 3 windows on one side and 4 on the other. Isn't that odd? But it's actually a completely symmetrical building. The entrance is plumb in the middle. So that, again, is him playing with your perceptions. He's a bit of a magician, you know, like the building is small in his hands. And he's saying, it could as well be a top hat and a rabbit, you know, for all the magical things he does with it.
Then we come to another really incredibly distinctive part of the building. The cage motif that he's using here is functionally useless. All you needed was a handrail here. But he just loves this idea of taking what's necessary and extending it and then locking it together with something else.
And then making it complex with 2 different ceilings for to what purpose? A ceiling here, then a ceiling above that goes right across, a ceiling that just comes there. Why?
And I think it's partly to acclimatise the visitor to the experience that they're going to have next.
That's true.
And you can see there's a kind of prelude to it here with this, as far as I know, unique in the art school, this semicircular arch. It's a very low arch here with the doorway, and that's really the first announcement of the architectural theme of the loggia that we're just going to go into.
Exactly, yeah. You feel the weight of these brick arches here, and it's an ironic feeling, it's a strange feeling, because this is surely a crypt, it's surely something down below the building, you know, in the dungeon, but yet it's at the absolute top, and as you turn from these brick vaults. You look out, and in fact, you're above the whole city. You're looking out these windows across the city, so you're up high. You expect to be down low. So this is what gives you the vertiginous quality here of the heavy brick that says underground, and the light and air that says you're flying over everything.
This is not a structural necessity. This is really a kind of aesthetic indulgence.
The building is so strong and its presence is so strong, I think it maybe can be a bit overwhelming. You know, and it's not just the building physically, there's this sort of weight of history in terms of what has occurred here artistically over the years.
It does attract absolute uber talent. There's always a superstar in every department. Everybody reveres. I mean, even in my department, you know, the people just make you feel like throwing your paintbrush away. So, oh, you know, what's the point?
The Glasgow School of Art's reputation soared in the 1980s when the figurative paintings of the new Glasgow boys gained international recognition. Then, in the 90s, a new generation of mainly female artists, such as Alison Watt, Jenny Saville and Julie Roberts, maintained the school's reputation for producing accomplished painters.
It was really exciting to know that there was young, live artists working in the city, and it came out of the art school that you were going to.
Then came a wave of conceptual artists, mostly from the school's renowned environmental art department, whose graduates have been a fixture on the shortlists of the UK's most prestigious art awards.
We've had, I think, in the last 4 years, 25% of the shortlisted artists for the Turner Prize were Glasgow School of Art graduates.
But it's not only the school's fine artists who have made an impression around the world. Alumni have excelled in the fields of design, fashion and architecture, and many others have branched out into quite different creative disciplines.
I used to sit here and watch John Byrne and Alistair Gray enter the building. They'd left already, but, you know, these people who already were famous, you kind of went, oh, look, that's John Byrne. He's a genius.
Now I was here with like Peter Capaldi, who's like a really great actor, and Muriel Gray was here, and you know, Robbie Coltrane.
I was at Glasgow School of Art when Robbie Coltrane and I were both thin in the 60s.
The art school was always a place for people to go, I think, who had a kind of creative bent. It's something they really wanted to do, but maybe they didn't know what it was yet, you know?
Gillies MacKinnon is one of Britain's most versatile film directors. His 1996 hit, Small Faces, is partly based on his experience at the art school.
No arms. I wonder how he eats his breakfast. Shut up, Lex. Tits.
Lex. It's down here on the right. Up here. What?
You could be anything. You could be a rock and roll singer. You could write poetry. You could write a book. It could go in any direction, actually, you know, and you kind of knew that. You could feel that.
Art schools have good credentials for making musicians and forming bands, and Glasgow's no different.
I think that the music and the art scene are so intertwined because they kind of have to involve each other in some way. Like, they just really feed off each other. And just like a lot of the things that are happening, like socially, people kind of just inspire each other in different ways.
After graduating, Roxanne Clifford joined the Royal We. Successful but short-lived, the band celebrated the release of their debut album by splitting up. With two other former members, Roxanne then founded Sexy Kids.
All right, ready? Time's running.
This song is inspired by her time at the art school.
Just kind of thinking about my time here, and I remember like one time scratching my name into a table. Somebody I was going out with at the time, and that was kind of like transitory, didn't really last. But then I remember coming back like a couple of years later, and it was still there. So quite like the idea of like there being a record of it after the event.
Okay, just play.
Did I fall in love when I was here? Definitely, yes. Probably more than once.
Right about 4 weeks before the degree show, I fell in love with a girl and asked her to marry me, and she said no. And if she'd said yes, my whole life would have been different. I'm glad she said no, actually, because I wouldn't have been an artist.
I used to start a love poem, broken-hearted about somebody. By the time I got it finished, I'd be broken-hearted over the next one.
I'd actually fallen in love before I arrived here with somebody who was already here as an architect, which was great, beautiful man and everything, but it did stop me from, you know, doing the rounds of the painters.
One day I'd spotted this guy who was absolutely glorious. He was an obvious Bowie fan. I can't remember his name, but it's probably just as well because he has no idea about this.
You don't need Mackintosh to design a building for you to fall in love in, but it's a good place to fall in love.
Mackintosh also fell in love at the Glasgow School of Art with a young design student, Margaret MacDonald, whom he went on to marry. The idea of being a fully rounded artist and not just an architect was central to Mackintosh's life. His wife was an artist, and so was her sister Frances and her husband Herbert McNair, and together they formed a group called The Four. Their aesthetic and poetic outlook earned them the nickname the Spook School. Coming out of the hidebound Victorian era, the Four may have stood out in industrial Glasgow, but elsewhere in the world, other like-minded artists and intellectuals were also challenging old ideas. At the time the Mac was being built, a new form of expression was emerging in the shape of Cubism. Einstein was working on his theory of relativity, music was changing, early jazz had just appeared, and in Vienna, where Sigmund Freud had just published The Interpretation of Dreams, Gustav Klimt furthered the fashion for the Oriental, in particular the style and decorative patterns of Japanese art.
Oh, yeah. Wow, I mean, it's a great ceiling here. You know, you just don't know what you're going to find when you walk into one of Mackintosh's studios. You know, the use of timbers up there. It's so Japanese, it's brilliant. There you go.
In his search for a new non-historical style of architecture, Mackintosh also looked to the simplicity of Japanese design, a style that focused on simple forms and natural materials, using texture, light and shadow to evoke a calming and organic feel. The influence of Japanese style can be seen throughout the school, but is most obvious in the library.
This is one of the most atmospheric spaces in the whole of Western architecture. The 18 letters of the Gaelic alphabet all stand for a tree. So if the letters are all trees, then a library clearly is a forest because it's full of letters. Ulysses, James Joyce Ulysses, is structured around the 18 trees which form the Gaelic alphabet. And so it could well be that that's what Mackintosh was doing here too. He knew all about the Celtic world, all about Gaelic symbolism and so forth. So I don't think it's to stretch the imagination too far to see that this is in fact a Celtic forest that we're in here. Not only are there so many levels of symbolism and meaning here, but there are really odd juxtapositions in here. So, for example, in the first place, you have the chamfers on these rods up here, and you see the colours which are really oddly un-Mackintosh colours: white, red, green, blue. Again, to do with the idea this is a forest, you could see this as some kind of natural symbolism. It's been said that that might well be water, earth, fire and air. Mm-hmm.
The really central thing, and this really underpins Newbury's educational philosophy and that we find coming to fruition so well in Mackintosh's building, is this kind of hands-on sense. It's not theoretical solutions to problems, you work with materials. And this is why when you go through the studios and you see these girders coming out and he turns the end around and turns it into a piece of poetry, you couldn't do that on a drawing board. You've got to look at, oh, there's a girder, how can we do this?
This practical approach was embraced by the arts and crafts movement, which was at its height when the Mac was being constructed. Characterised by handcrafted objects, it aimed to re-establish the importance of craftsmanship in an era of mass production. Details like these can be seen throughout the building. Mackintosh designed even the smallest objects, no matter how utilitarian they might be.
From the door handle to the building, you know, to the light shade, to everything went through him, but it was filtered through him. Everything was designed, and if you walk around it, and it's like every bit of it has really been considered.
That idea of a project as a complete artwork was one of the foundations of the Art Nouveau movement. Characterised by floral motifs and curved lines, Art Nouveau proposed that beautiful and harmonious art should become a part of everyday life, because art exists to make people's lives better.
It's really an incredible building, and it really kind of stands up to that kind of that level of inspection and kind of that looking at the detailing in it. It's just brilliant, and it's something that actually I've realised that I do in my own work to an extent. With kind of great architecture like this, it must kind of seep into you, kind of somehow, there's no doubt.
Martin Boyce was selected to represent Scotland at the 2009 Venice Biennale, the world's largest and most prestigious showcase for contemporary art.
This corner was where I had my final degree show. This is the sort of scene of the crime. Sort of being here now, I can sort of remember that quite clearly, yeah, and all the stress that went along with that.
Boyce often draws on modernist designs for his work. This series of ventilation grilles, called Our Breath and This Breeze, was first shown in 2007.
The ventilation grilles always were kind of about a sort of threshold between the parts of architecture that we occupy and the parts that we don't, the unseen guts of a building, where you have conduits and air conditioning and ventilation. In a way, that's where the building is alive. It's kind of breathing, so so the architecture is kind of breathing through these thresholds. I look a lot at the history of architecture and design, and this pattern actually comes out of these 4 concrete kind of cubist constructivist trees that were made in 1925 in Paris. But when I sort of flattened it out and sort of created this repeat, it really had that sort of arts and crafts and sort of deco feel to it, which kind of surprised me, but I guess threw up interesting questions about that lineage of design and art, and how one thing bleeds into another. So, that took me straight back to Mackintosh. In a way, it's like an undercover piece, because once they're installed, they kind of look like it's the fabric of the building. They look like what they're supposed to look like vents.
You always have this feeling of exploration. You never feel like you've learned the whole building. Just when you think you understand it all, you discover something that you've missed. I used to always wonder what these strange doors were for. There's things like this all over the art school. I think it's just a storage cupboard. These vents as well that look like cages for some subterranean creatures.
Look at this one here.
Just one step at the top.
I've never noticed that before.
No, right. I'm glad you came. Near the
and there's the top end
tops of the windows, which plunge down. Look at the curve of the stairs as they go around it. This pragmatic, always adapting to the situation and adapting the situation to the poetics of the whole. Because of course it looks strange having these clearly exterior windows, but yet they're to the inside of the building. That's because this stairway was built with the 1909 edition, whereas that part was built in 1899 or completed in 1899, and that faced to the outside then.
It soon became clear that only part of the plan could be built for the original budget of £14,000, so Newbury's committee settled for a two-phase build. Phase 1 started in 1897, and 2 years later, the first half of the building opened for use. In the 8 years it took Newbury to raise enough money to build the second phase, it became apparent that the school's needs had changed, so more studio workspace was included on the top floor. To improve circulation, an extra staircase was added at either end of the building and a corridor to join them, now known as the hen run.
Which I think is to do with the... We used to have the girl students up here, and that's why they call it, you know, hen as in female. I don't know why they called it a run. Maybe that's a bit disparaging, isn't it?
And I've heard people say how disappointing that was, that they couldn't have built it, you know, all at once. But I tend to think that was beneficial to Glaswegians, because what it really meant was that at the end, Mackintosh was no longer a young architect. He was a guy absolutely at the peak of his powers.
When the first half was built, Mackintosh was just starting out, and his ideas were influenced by things close to home.
This here is the first part of the building. This is the 19th century part, and you can see the strong influence of the Scottish Borrowdale style here.
By the time he came to build the second phase, he'd had the privilege of almost a decade to develop his ideas.
This elevation is phenomenal. That's the library up there.
His whole career had expanded, he'd become well known. He'd built the two very famous houses, Windy Hill and Hill House. He'd built the Scotland Street School, he'd built the Daily Record Office, he'd built the Queen's Cross Church and so forth. So he was very much a more mature architect by the time he came to build the western half of it.
A comparison of the school's east and west elevations shows clearly how the architect's style had developed. Had the building been constructed in one go, according to the original plans, the two sides would have looked very similar. In fact, Mackintosh's development over the decade of construction can be seen on all four sides of the building. How he ties together a variety of influences and styles to form something new is what makes the building unique. This eclectic approach is something Mackintosh shared with a group of Austrian artists known as the Vienna Secession, formed in 1897 by Gustav Klimt. Mackintosh and his wife Margaret MacDonald were well known to them. They exhibited work at the Vienna Secession exhibition of 1900 and became friends with the architect Joseph Hoffmann. The secessionists didn't adopt any one style. They wanted to explore the possibilities of art beyond the confines of academic tradition and create a new style that owed nothing to history, an idea that the modern movement would embrace 2 decades later.
I always thought it was interesting that quite often in big kind of overviews of modern architecture, one of the first buildings almost always would be Mackintosh's Glasgow School of Art.
And I remember getting this Schindler book, and the first line in the book was, "Modernism began in Scotland with Charles Rennie Mackintosh," you know, which I'd never... I mean, it's kind of a bold statement.
In 1936, Nicholas Pevsner published his book Pioneers of Modern Design and included Mackintosh as one of the early masters. The main idea of modernist architecture was to create functional spaces without decoration for its own sake. The modernists often used factory-made parts and man-made materials such as metal and concrete, and rejected traditional styles and ornamentation. The most important figures in modern architecture had established their reputations by the 1920s. Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius and Le Corbusier, who famously said, "The house is a machine for living in." But in the decades before that, architects like Mackintosh were already paving the way.
The phrase for the modern movement was form following function. You know, the idea that a building should in some way encapsulate the type of thing that's happening inside it. Mackintosh did that expertly in this project. We have the beginnings of, in the huge windows, for instance, that let in the ambient light into the studios, a kind of industrial aesthetic and the beginnings, therefore, of the modern movement.
While he wasn't a 19th century architect of the styles, because he didn't just use one style for one building, or not in this building at any rate, then neither was he a true modernist, if we want to categorise it that way, because he wasn't able to start completely from zero. He couldn't just completely forget all these historical styles.
Mackintosh may have become known as a pioneer of the modern movement, but the art school is far removed from the bleak utilitarianism of modernism. Mackintosh designed according to human needs, seeing people as individuals, not masses, who needed not a machine to live in, but a work of art.
Here we were working in a building that we were told was one of the most significant buildings in the UK. So obviously you're going to go, I don't really care about it.
I remember there was a real phase when I was a student that people would steal the clocks, the Mackintosh clocks, and there was always these possibly apocryphal tales of, oh yeah, somebody in 40 years stole this clock and sold it for like, £500 or something.
The thing is, of course, you can't sell it because everyone knows where they're from, and then they would just they'd be on the step in a carrier bag the next day, after somebody given up trying to sell it.
We didn't really respect the building at all. We didn't really respect anything, because you don't when you're a student, and particularly an art student. So in a way, they're kind of the least appropriate people who should be using the building, because they're the least respectful and the least responsible.
The School of Art poses a difficult question for those who run the building, because it is a building of international importance to architects, designers, art lovers, the wider public. So it must endure.
The Mac is currently being refurbished at a cost of £8.7 million, with the aim of returning as much of the building as possible to its original condition.
I think if the powers that be had their way, there'd just be computers in this place, because then nobody could make a mess and ruin anything. Just laptops, hot desking.
When I was here, the library was our reference library. It wasn't just a hermetically sealed room for Japanese tourists. It was just where we sat and did reference and research and threw rolled up balls of paper at each other's head.
The library, beautiful library. It's all been scrubbed clean. It's still got some nice stains, still some nice coffee stains on the desk.
Obviously, in terms of professional museum standards, you would not allow users to knock about the building or have access to unique works of art. There would be strict rules about not touching and not sitting and not moving. But with careful management, and the appropriate resources, I think it's possible to tread a line where you preserve the building, but you allow it still to function as it was intended.
It's a constant job to manage the balance between staff and students and visitors. Constant job. And one has to be ever vigilant that the balance doesn't move towards the visitors. I mean, without a doubt.
Whoops. Oh, you're a tour? Yes. Oh, good. So we.
The people who come here, they remark all the time that what gives it its quality, what gives the building its quality, is the fact that it's still used, the fact that it's still got the marks of generations of students.
He was a textile artist. I'm sorry.
Excuse us. Sorry.
The building would be nothing if it wasn't full of stinking, rebellious students. It's not true, it wouldn't be nothing, it would still be beautiful, but it would be a museum piece, and that would just be tragedy. If this ever stops being an art school and there's a museum, it'll die.
Wildness is not a thing, it's just within animals. There's wildness within human beings. I think it's a very precious commodity
You know, and art schools is one of the last bastions of preserving that wildness.
Husband and wife partnership Matthew D.L. and Louise Scullion met at the art school and have worked together since 1993. They create photography, video, sound and sculpture that explores new artistic languages on the subject of ecology and nature.
What a good dog.
Right, let's see what she's seeing.
Right.
We were filming a dog moving through the art school today, trying to let it be as free as possible to run and move into spaces. I kind of view the building from a different perspective. That was good.
The dog was this very wolf-looking dog, and we've been kind of interested in doing something with this breed of dog for a while.
That's masterful. We're using the dog as a metaphor for the students, you know, that sort of wild spirit, that kind of free spirit, the maverick that can still do things that are unconventional.
The finished building was opened on Wednesday the 15th of December 1909. It had taken 12 years to complete and cost approximately £40,000, the equivalent of 3.8 million today. It was one of the first buildings in Scotland to have electric light and a state-of-the-art heating and air cooling system. And despite not being named on the initial competition entry, Mackintosh was by now a partner in Honeyman and Keppie and was credited with the design.
This was the last major piece of work that he did that was entirely his design and build. So for various reasons, we didn't get the next major building from Mackintosh.
He kind of suffered, I guess, from the old Glaswegian West of Scotland trait. You know, he was, I think he was, and he would probably tell you himself, or hear that he didn't feel as though he was appreciated in his home country, in his home city. Despaired of the lack of work when this building was finished, and eventually gave up, left Honeyman and Keppie, tried to set up on his own, was unsuccessful.
Unable to secure any major commissions in Glasgow, Mackintosh headed south to London in 1914, but his timing was poor. With the country at war, demand for new buildings was limited, particularly for work in Mackintosh's style.
In London, Mackintosh had a reputation, but it was a reputation for being a bit weird and part of the Celtic fringe, something like that. You know, so the London view is dismissive. The London view of his peculiarity is dismissive, which means it also wasn't a form of understanding. It was a form of pigeonholing and putting out of the way.
Mackintosh focused on designing interiors and textiles, but as an architect he slipped into obscurity. It was not until Pevsner's book appeared in the 30s that his reputation within the architectural community was acknowledged. Publicly, Mackintosh remained virtually unknown at home, but thanks to articles in some influential journals, things were different abroad.
It was either 1967 or 1968. You couldn't work in here in the library of Glasgow School of Art without 5 Japanese people with Super 8 cameras saying, sit still, get in the light, turn the page back again, and, suddenly you were very well aware that internationally Mackintosh was a huge, big deal.
An exhibition at the Edinburgh Festival in 1968 helped turn the tide of opinion at home, but also kick-started a fashion for Mackintosh.
When I was here, Mackintosh was so unfashionable, it was just ridiculous, you know. We were supposed to throw back our heads and laugh at the kitsch nature of Mackintosh because, of course, it just, by that time, it just bubbled into the lower aspirant middle classes, you know, so the golf club wives that wanted to sort of do out their dining room in Mackintosh. And so it was to be despised. But nevertheless, it was a little bit uncomfortable because you were sort of being taught not to particularly respect it, which is ludicrous now. I mean, I remember a job I had, you know, long after leaving art school when I was working at the Museum of Antiquities as an exhibition designer, and we put on a secessionists exhibition, of course, with great Vienna secessionists, and you suddenly became clear how important Mackintosh had been, you know, and how he'd been affected by all the things that had been going on in Europe. And we weren't taught that. Isn't that odd? It was always a sort of slightly dirty secret.
In 1990, when Glasgow became European City of Culture, Mackintosh was co-opted as a branding tool. Since then, his legacy has become something for the citizens of Glasgow to be proud of.
Mackintosh's reputation has a major city behind it, and a major city which needs to increase income from these kind of tourist activities. And I can't think of another architect like that except for Gaudí, and maybe the citizens of Barcelona operate in the same way on him, and the interests of the city operate in the same way.
I think you just appreciate it more, and the more you see, the more you travel, and the more you realise there aren't places like this in every city. You know, there are incredible places, but this is an absolutely astonishing building.
The nice thing in my life has been that I've worked around the world, and people have known really well the Mackintosh building. Said, "Oh my, did you go to that amazing Rennie Mackintosh building? It's beautiful. I've been there. I went to Glasgow to see it," and it's been a sort of point of reference, in my working life as well.
Makeup artist Morag Ross started out working on British films by directors such as Derek Jarman, Mike Leigh and Sally Potter. She then moved to Hollywood and has worked as a personal makeup artist to Liam Neeson, Bill Murray and Cate Blanchett. In 2004, she won a BAFTA for her work on Martin Scorsese's The Aviator.
My friends did say to me that I did the greatest part of my day's work on my face in the morning before I came to college. And I think that was true. But you know, it put me in good stead for the career that's panned out. What I'm doing today is I'm making up an eye, and the final made-up eye will be projected on a wall of the art school building. And I love the idea of completion because I studied mural design. And in a way I still do murals because I do makeup. Obviously I've scaled down, but then the films that I'm part of are projected onto a screen and they become mural size again. And then I was, you know, within the confines of Glasgow weather, I thought it might rain. So I'm actually going to try and have a rain effect within the elemental effect that might happen and see if the makeup will actually come off the eye.
Fantastic.
Oh, here we go.
It's actually scary.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I really like the bricks.
Yeah.
It does look like pixels or something.
Yeah.
Like a broken up digital photograph. Oh, it's really beautiful. I'm more thrilled than anything that the building did its own bit, you know, and enhanced it, just with the texture and the colours of the building.
Sometimes when I'm here by myself, I often pretend that the sculptures, that they're people. Sometimes it sounds really stupid, but I don't know, it doesn't make you feel as alone. It can kind of freak you out sometimes, but yeah.
It's like a nightmare.
Down here. I've never really thought of this only because I'm never by myself before in the space, but it nearly feels as if you're in a ship.
Only a small percentage of the art school students actually get to work in the Mac. The rest are spread out over a variety of purpose-built and adapted buildings nearby.
We did a fitness for purpose study. We had architects come in and assess fitness for purpose. We have 9 buildings. 7 of them were not terribly fit for purpose. 1 of them was partially fit for purpose. The only one that was fully fit for purpose was this building, the Mackintosh building. So it's still absolutely functional in terms of being an environment that students and staff work in enormously effectively. It still provides the kind of magic that it always has.
In an attempt to bring the rest of the campus up to the standard of the Mac, this year has seen the launch of a competition to find architects for a huge redevelopment that includes the demolition of all the buildings opposite the Mac and the creation of something new.
So the site really runs from Hill Street to Dalhousie Street and as far back as the lane. So it's a huge site, absolutely huge site.
Let's face it, anything that goes up over there, even if it's a B&Q garden shed, cannot be worse than that pile of pish that is facing the Mackintosh like a Ned, you know, trying to pick a fight.
That's a dump across there. It was a dump 25 years ago when I left art school, and it had just been built then.
What these buildings do at the moment is throw this into kind of quite stark relief. You know, there's no doubt that what the superior piece of architecture is.
It's a really tough gig for whoever the architect or architects end up being who are going to build this new building, because it's almost like having, you know, one of the finest architects in the modern era watching over your shoulder and just begging you not to make a mess of it.
Absolutely, we'll go for it. Every single architect practicing in Glasgow should be going for it.
In 1923, Mackintosh and his wife moved to the south of France. There he produced a series of watercolour landscapes, which turned out to be his last creative work. He died on December the 10th, 1928, from throat cancer. This building is considered his masterpiece.
It still remains one of the most important and beautiful buildings in the world. In the world. I mean, there's no question of it. I've decided. I think it'd be hard to argue me down on that.
I'm not trying to create a kind of a false idol out of the building, you know? I'm not an architect. I couldn't comment on that. I can only talk about how I felt as a boy about that building, how it excited me, what promise it gave to me about life and what could happen rather than what might happen, you know? I think it raised my expectations about things. And I doubt I would have taken the chances I took later on if I hadn't had that feeling early, you know, in my life.
I have no idea where my life would have gone if I hadn't gone there. It meant everything to me.
Being here now makes me want to come back again more regularly because I've been neglecting it. It's like neglecting an old lover who was very good to you and who you've forgotten about now, you know, so it's sorry to sound a bit soppy there, but it is like that.
The art school building has to break up with a lot of people every single year. They just go away and they never come back. And that's really heartbreaking.
Famed for their breakup songs, indie rock band Frightened Rabbit are led by singer-songwriter and art school graduate Scott Hutchison.
I've always liked the idea that inanimate objects have emotions and personalities, and this building, like more than any other that I've ever really even been in, has this like such a unique personality in it. I thought it was nice to kind of personify it. It's like maybe an old dandy kind of man who likes to hang around young people just because they kind of keep him young, and it remains hip in spite of its age. We kind of recorded some doors slamming and knocks on the door to make the drum kind of loop in the song as well. Hopefully it was trying to get that the building was talking and trying to like express itself in the only way it knew how, and then I was maybe its voice.
Wish I had learned your name, but I couldn't read, I couldn't speak. Oh, nobody taught me. Met you when we were full of lemonade. You strode boldly in bold clothes, covered the fear. Spent 4 years inside me. Day upon day, you pushed colors and borders, led by my gaze. Oh, the photograph, the last gasp on the steps at the end. Just a tiny glance, all I ask amidst all this attention. The old man visits every day, bare